I was sitting at my kitchen table drinking my morning coffee when I heard the sound of water sputtering from the bathroom faucet. Then nothing. The silence that followed was deafening. I walked to the sink, turned the handle, and watched as a few last drops trickled out before stopping completely. My water had been shut off. In rural Montana, this wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a serious problem. I grabbed my phone and called the county water department, but they told me everything on their end was fine. That's when I knew exactly what had happened. The Ridgeview Meadows Homeowners Association had finally made good on their threats. For the past 6 months, they'd been sending me increasingly aggressive letters about unpaid fines. The fines were ridiculous. $50 for having my trash cans visible from the street on a non-collection day. $100 for parking my work truck in my own driveway instead of the garage. $200 for painting my front door a shade of blue that was apparently not on their approved color list, even though I'd checked the list before painting it. I'd refused to pay because every single fine was either based on rules that didn't exist when I bought my house or was being applied selectively. My neighbor 3 houses down had a bright red door that wasn't on the approved list either, but they'd never gotten a fine. Another neighbor kept his boat parked in his driveway year-round, but no fine for him either. It was targeted harassment, plain and simple, and I wasn't going to reward it with compliance. My name is Nathan Ferris, and I'm a hydrogeologist. I know water systems inside and out. It's literally what I do for a living. When I bought this property 5 years ago, I'd done my homework. The land I owned was special. Beneath my 10 acres sat a natural aquifer with a well that I'd drilled and maintained at considerable personal expense. What made this situation particularly interesting was that, when the Ridgeview Meadows development was built around my property 3 years ago, the developer had approached me about water access. The subdivision was too far from the municipal water lines to make connection economical, and drilling individual wells for each home would have been cost-prohibitive given the geological challenges in the area. My well, however, was already established and produced more than enough water for my needs. We'd worked out an agreement. I granted them an easement to run water lines from my well to service the 43 homes in the subdivision. In exchange, they paid me a monthly fee, covered all maintenance costs related to the expanded distribution system, and acknowledged in writing that I retained full ownership and control of the well itself. The agreement was rock solid because I'd had my lawyer draft it specifically to protect my interests. It clearly stated that I could terminate the easement with 60 days written notice if there was a material breach of our agreement, or if the relationship became untenable. It also explicitly stated that nothing in the easement agreement obligated me to join their HOA or submit to their rules, as my property predated the subdivision and was not part of the planned development. I pulled out the thick folder where I kept all my HOA correspondence and found the certified letter I'd received 3 days ago. It was from Patricia Drummond, the HOA president, and it was a masterpiece of petty tyranny. The letter informed me that due to my continued flagrant violations of community standards and refusal to pay legitimately assessed fines totaling $1,400, the HOA board had voted to exercise their right to enforce compliance through utility service interruption. They claimed that because I was in arrears, they had the authority to shut off my water access. The legal ignorance in that letter was breathtaking. They'd shut off my water by tampering with the valve on my side of the distribution point, essentially trespassing on my property to do so. But they'd made an even bigger mistake. By shutting off my water, they'd also shut off their own. The system was set up so that water flowed from my well through my house first, then out to their distribution network. If I didn't have water, neither did they. I walked outside to the utility shed where the main distribution valve was housed. Sure enough, someone had put a padlock on the door, and through the window I could see they'd closed the main valve. I had keys to the shed, of course, since it was on my property. But I didn't touch anything yet. Instead, I took photos from every angle, documenting the trespass and the tampering with my private property. My phone rang. It was my neighbor, Dennis Hart, one of the few reasonable people in the subdivision. "Nathan, do you have water?" he asked. "Nope. They shut me off this morning." "They shut all of us off too. My wife just tried to do laundry and nothing came out. What's going on?" I explained the situation. Dennis let out a long whistle. "So Patricia thought she could shut off your water as punishment, and she didn't realize it would shut off the whole neighborhood." That appears to be the case. That woman is unbelievable. She's already gotten 3 calls from angry neighbors. I heard her tell Martha Jenkins that there was a problem with the well system and you were refusing to fix it. That got my attention. She's telling people this is my fault. Yep. She's telling everyone you're holding the neighborhood hostage because you won't pay your fines. I thanked Dennis and hung up. Patricia was escalating this fast, and she was lying to the community to cover her mistake. Time to make some calls of my own. First, I called my lawyer, Robert Chen. I'd kept him on retainer specifically for HOA issues, because I'd known from the beginning this might get ugly. Robert listened to my explanation and started laughing. "They trespassed on your property to shut off your water, which also shut off their water, and now they're blaming you for it." That's the situation. "Nathan, this is the easiest case I've ever had. Don't touch that valve. Let them sit without water while we document everything. Do you have cameras on your property?" "Security cameras covering all the main areas, including the utility shed." "I should have footage of whoever came onto my property this morning." "Perfect. Pull that footage and send it to me. I'm going to draft a cease and desist letter and a formal notice of easement termination. We'll give them the 60 days as required, but we're starting that clock now. I'm also going to send a demand letter for damages related to trespass and harassment." I pulled up the security footage on my phone. At 6:15 that morning, a white pickup truck had pulled into my driveway. 2 men got out, one of them carrying bolt cutters and a padlock. They'd cut off my original lock, entered the shed, closed the valve, and installed their own lock. The truck had an HOA management company logo on the side. They'd actually hired professionals to do their illegal dirty work. I sent the footage to Robert and then sat down to draft my own letter. By noon, I had a formal 60-day notice of easement termination printed and ready to go. The letter was polite but firm. It stated that due to material breach of our agreement, specifically trespass and property damage, I was exercising my right to terminate the easement. They had 60 days to make alternative water arrangements for the subdivision. I drove to Patricia's house personally to deliver it. She lived in one of the larger homes at the entrance to the subdivision, a 2-story colonial with perfectly manicured lawns and flower beds that probably violated several water conservation ordinances during Montana's dry summers. I knocked on the door. She answered wearing yoga pants and a scowl. Patricia Drummond was exactly what you'd picture when you heard the words HOA president. She was in her late 40s, had the kind of highlighted blonde hair that required monthly salon visits, and wore an expression that suggested the world was constantly disappointing her. She'd moved here from California 2 years ago and had immediately started trying to transform rural Montana into whatever sanitized suburb she'd left behind. "What do you want, Nathan?" she asked. I handed her the envelope. "Notice of easement termination." You have 60 days to arrange alternative water service for the subdivision. She didn't open it. You can't do that. I absolutely can. It's in the easement agreement. Your organization trespassed on my property this morning, tampered with my well system, and shut off my water without legal authority. That constitutes a material breach. The easement is terminated. Her face flushed red. You're being ridiculous. All you have to do is pay your fines and we'll turn your water back on. You don't have the authority to turn my water off. That well is on my private property. I own it. You have an easement to access the water, not to control my access. And those fines are bogus selective enforcement of rules that either don't exist or aren't being applied equally. The rules apply to everyone. Really? Then why does Greg Paulson 3 houses down have a red door that isn't on the approved color list, but he's never been fined? Why does Mike Richardson keep his boat in his driveway year-round, but I get fined for parking my work truck there? Why do you have security lights on the front of your house that stay on all night, which violates the dark sky provision in the actual covenants, but you've never fined yourself? Patricia's mouth opened and closed. She hadn't expected me to come prepared with specific examples. That's different. How? Greg's door is burgundy, which is on the approved list. Mike's boat is on an approved trailer with a proper cover. My security lights are for safety, which is exempt. Greg's door is red. I've seen the paint can in his garage. He used Bayer's Cardinal Red. Mike's boat hasn't had a cover in 3 months, and the trailer isn't on any approved list I've ever seen. And there's no safety exemption for decorative security lights. I helped write those covenants with the original developer. I know what's in them. She crossed her arms. This is absurd. You're going to cut off water to 43 families because you don't want to pay $700 in fines. $1,400, according to your letter. And no, I'm cutting off the easement because your organization committed trespass and property damage. The fact that you're now lying to the neighborhood about whose fault this is doesn't help your case either. I'm not lying to anyone. Dennis Hart told me you're telling people there's a problem with the well and I'm refusing to fix it. That's a lie. There's no problem with the well. Your people shut off a valve which shut off water to everyone including me. You created this problem, and now you're blaming me for it. Someone shouted from inside her house. Patricia, what's going on? We still don't have water. A man appeared behind her. He was tall, balding, and looked irritated. Patricia's husband, I assumed. She turned to him. It's fine, Howard. I'm handling it. Doesn't look handled. This is Nathan, right? The well guy. He looked at me. Can you fix the well? There's nothing wrong with the well, I said. Your HOA shut off a valve this morning. They broke into my utility shed, closed the main distribution valve, and locked it with their own lock. That shut off water to my house and to the whole subdivision. All they have to do is open the valve again. Howard turned to Patricia. You shut off his water. He has unpaid fines. We're within our rights to enforce compliance. By shutting off his water, Patricia, he owns the well. We don't have the right to do that. The management company said we could. I interrupted. The management company was wrong. They committed criminal trespass and property damage on your behalf. I have security footage of their employees cutting off my lock and installing their own. My lawyer is filing a police report this afternoon. Howard's face went pale. Jesus Christ, Patricia, please tell me you got legal advice before doing this. Of course I did. The management company's lawyer reviewed it. Did your lawyer review it? Silence. Howard rubbed his face. This is a disaster. How much are his fines? $1,400, Patricia said. Just pay the man his $1,400 and turn his water back on. It's the principle of the thing. I stepped in. It's not about the money, it's about targeted harassment and selective rule enforcement. I'm not paying fines for violations that aren't violations or for rules that don't exist. More importantly, you don't get to trespass on my property and tamper with my well system. The easement is terminated. You have 60 days. I suggest you start making calls to well drilling companies. I walked back to my truck, leaving Patricia and Howard arguing on their doorstep. I could hear their raised voices as I drove away. Back at my house, I restored my own water access. The bolt cutters in my garage made quick work of their padlock. I opened the main valve just enough to supply my house, but I installed a secondary valve that isolated the distribution lines to the subdivision. Their water stayed off. Mine came back on. Within an hour, my phone started ringing. I didn't answer the calls from numbers I didn't recognize. By evening, I had 37 missed calls and 42 text messages. Most were from angry neighbors demanding I fix the water. A few were from neighbors who understood what was happening and were supportive. Dennis sent me a text that just said, "Hold the line. Patricia is panicking." The next morning, I had a visit from the county sheriff. Deputy Martinez was a friendly guy I'd met a few times at community events. He looked apologetic when I opened the door. "Morning, Nathan. I've got to ask you some questions about the water situation." "Come on in. Want some coffee?" We sat at my kitchen table. Martinez pulled out a notebook. "I've gotten about 20 calls since yesterday afternoon from residents claiming you shut off their water. What's your side of this?" I showed him everything. The certified letters from the HOA, the security footage of the trespass, the easement agreement with the termination clause clearly marked, the photographic evidence of their padlock on my utility shed. Martinez took notes and watched all the footage carefully. "So they trespassed on your property, cut off your lock, shut your water off, and didn't realize it would shut off the whole subdivision." "That's correct." "And you've terminated the easement?" "I have. They have 60 days notice as required by the agreement." Martinez closed his notebook. "Well, this is civil, not criminal, except for the trespass part. Do you want to press charges?" "Yes. I want a formal police report documenting the trespass and property damage. My lawyer will be filing suit." "Fair enough." For what it's worth, Patricia Drummond has been a pain in everyone's backside since she moved here. She called the sheriff's office 6 times last month complaining about various violations she wanted us to enforce. We had to explain to her that HOA rules aren't criminal law. She wasn't happy about that. After Martinez left, I got a call from Robert. "I've got news. Patricia Drummond called my office this morning demanding that we withdraw the termination notice. She's threatening to sue you for breach of contract." "On what grounds?" "She claims you have an obligation to provide water to the subdivision, and you can't just terminate the agreement because of a minor dispute." "Minor dispute? They committed criminal trespass." I pointed that out. I also pointed out that the termination clause is crystal clear and that they're the ones in breach, not you. She hung up on me. "What happens now?" "Now we wait. Either they come to their senses and back down, or they actually file suit and get destroyed in court. Either way, you're in a strong position. In the meantime, do not turn their water back on. Every day they're without water strengthens our position that they need you more than you need them." Day 3 without water for the subdivision was when things got interesting. I was working in my home office when I heard vehicles in my driveway. I looked out to see 3 pickup trucks and about a dozen people marching toward my house. Patricia was leading them, along with several angry-looking residents I recognized from the neighborhood. I met them on my porch. "Can I help you?" Patricia stepped forward, flanked by 2 large men who were apparently there to look intimidating. It didn't work. I'm 6'3" and spent my 20s working oil fields before going back to school for my geology degree. I don't intimidate easily. Nathan, this has gone on long enough. We don't have water. People have children. We have elderly residents. You need to turn the water back on now. You need to leave my property. Not until you turn on the water. Patricia, you're trespassing. I'm asking you to leave. All of you. One of the men next to her spoke up. He was red-faced and sweating. You can't just leave us without water. That's illegal. No, what's illegal is trespassing on my property, which is what you're doing right now. What's also illegal is breaking into my utility shed and tampering with my well system, which your HOA did 3 days ago. A woman in the back shouted, "We have kids. They need water." Then I suggest you direct your complaints to your HOA president, who created this situation. I'm not the one who shut off your water. She did. Patricia's face was bright red. You're being unreasonable. All you have to do is pay your fines and we'll turn your water back on. You don't have the authority to turn my water on or off. This is my property. That's my well. You had an easement agreement that your organization breached. The easement is terminated. You have 57 days left to make alternative arrangements. Dennis Hart pushed through the crowd. Patricia, this is stupid. You're the one who shut off the water. You can't show up at his house with an angry mob and demand he fix your mistake. Stay out of this, Dennis. No, you told us there was a problem with the well. You lied. You shut off his water illegally, which shut off all our water, and now you're trying to force him to give in to your demands. This is extortion. Another neighbor, an older woman named Ellen Foster, spoke up. Dennis is right. I've been reading the easement agreement. It's posted on the HOA website. Nathan has every right to terminate it, and we're lucky he gave us 60 days notice instead of shutting it off immediately. The crowd was starting to fracture. Several people were now arguing with Patricia instead of supporting her. She looked around desperately, realizing she was losing control of the situation. Fine, she said. We'll sue you. The HOA will file an injunction to force you to continue water service. Go ahead, I said. My lawyer would love that. While you're at it, explain to a judge why you think it's acceptable to trespass on private property and tamper with someone's well system. The crowd slowly dispersed. A few people apologized to me as they left. One couple, the Johnsons, asked if there was anything they could do to help resolve the situation. I told them the easiest solution would be for Patricia to resign and for the new board to negotiate a new easement agreement with appropriate protections and oversight. That evening I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I answered it anyway. Hello, Mr. Ferris. This is Angela Brennan. I'm an attorney representing the Ridgeview Meadows HOA. I have a lawyer. Direct all communications through Robert Chen. Please just hear me out. I'm not calling to threaten you. I'm calling because I need to understand the full situation before I advise my client on how to proceed. I was curious enough to listen. Go on. I've reviewed the easement agreement. I've also reviewed the HOA's actions over the past few days. As a lawyer, I need to tell you that you're completely within your rights to terminate the easement. The HOA's actions constituted a clear material breach. Tell your client that. I intend to. But I need you to understand the position this puts the community in. Finding an alternative water source is going to take months, possibly over a year. Drilling 43 individual wells isn't feasible given the geology in that area. You're the hydrogeologist, so you know this better than I do. Running lines from the municipal system would cost somewhere in the neighborhood of $2 million. The HOA doesn't have that kind of money. That's not my problem. Your client should have thought about that before they decided to play games with my water access. I understand. But would you be willing to negotiate a new easement agreement? One that explicitly protects you from HOA rules and fines. one that gives you additional protections and perhaps better compensation. That got my attention. I'm listening. What if we drafted a new agreement that explicitly states you're not subject to any HOA rules or regulations? Your property would be completely exempt. No fines, no enforcement actions, no jurisdiction whatsoever. We'd also increase your monthly compensation to reflect the actual market value of the water access, and we'd establish clear penalties for any future attempts to interfere with your property or the well system. What about the current fines? Dismissed. Completely. With a written apology from the board. And Patricia, Angela sighed, I can't promise anything regarding personnel decisions, but between you and me, several board members are already calling for her resignation. This debacle has made that more likely. I want all of that in writing before I even consider it. I also want a formal acknowledgement from the HOA that they committed trespass and property damage, and I want reimbursement for my legal fees to date. I'll draft a proposal and send it to your attorney. After I hung up, I called Robert and filled him in. He was cautiously optimistic. This is good. They're panicking, which means we have leverage. Let's see what they offer, but don't agree to anything without significant concessions. You hold all the cards here. The next day, a formal proposal arrived via email. It was actually better than I'd expected. The new easement agreement included complete exemption from all HOA rules, an increase in monthly compensation from $2,000 to $4,000, a 15-year term instead of the previous 10-year term, and automatic renewal unless either party gave notice. There was a clause holding the HOA liable for any future trespass or interference, with liquidated damages of $50,000 per incident. All existing fines were dismissed with a formal written apology, and they agreed to reimburse my legal fees up to $10,000. The only catch was they wanted water service restored within 48 hours of signing. Robert and I went over every word of the agreement. He suggested a few minor changes, mostly clarification of terms and strengthening of the liability provisions. We sent back our redline version. They accepted all our changes without argument. Within 3 days of Angela's phone call, we had a fully executed new easement agreement. I restored water service to the subdivision on a Friday afternoon. My phone immediately started getting calls and texts from grateful neighbors. Dennis brought over a bottle of good whiskey to say thanks. Ellen Foster dropped off a homemade pie. Even some of the people who'd been part of Patricia's angry mob apologized. Patricia herself stayed silent. I didn't hear from her at all. The HOA held an emergency election 2 weeks later. Patricia was voted out as president by a margin of 38-5. The new president was Ellen Foster, who'd been one of the founding members of the community and had opposed Patricia's election from the start. Ellen called me personally to apologize for everything that had happened and to thank me for being reasonable enough to negotiate a new agreement. Patricia was completely out of control, Ellen said. She saw the HOA presidency as her personal fiefdom. Half the fines she issued were for rules she made up herself. The other half were her targeting people she didn't like. We should have reined her in sooner, but she was good at manipulating the board meetings and making people afraid to challenge her. What's she doing now? She and Howard put their house up for sale. They're moving back to California. Good riddance, honestly. But that wasn't the end of the story. 3 weeks after water service was restored, I got a call from Deputy Martinez. Nathan, we've got a situation. Can you come down to the sheriff's office? What kind of situation? I'd rather explain in person. I drove to the sheriff's office in town, wondering what this could be about. Martinez met me in the lobby and led me to a small conference room. Inside was a detective I didn't recognize and another man in a suit. Nathan Ferris, this is Detective Carolyn Rice and Assistant District Attorney James Morton. They need to talk to you about the incident with your well. I sat down, confused. Okay. Detective Rice opened a folder. Mr. Ferris, we've been investigating the trespass incident at your property. During our investigation, we discovered some additional concerning information. The management company that the HOA hired to shut off your water, Mountain States Property Management, doesn't have a license to operate in Montana. They're based in Idaho and were operating illegally across state lines. Okay, but what does that have to do with me? Nothing, directly. But when we interviewed the employees who came to your property, they told us something interesting. They said Patricia Drummond specifically instructed them to do whatever necessary to shut off your water, including cutting locks if needed. She apparently told them you'd given permission but had lost the keys. That's a lie. We know. We have your security footage. The thing is, instructing someone to trespass and commit property damage based on false pretenses crosses the line from civil to criminal. Mrs. Drummond knowingly and intentionally arranged for criminal trespass and property damage. She also lied to the contractors about having authority to access your property. Ada Morton spoke up. We're considering filing criminal charges against Patricia Drummond for criminal mischief and conspiracy to commit trespass. We wanted to talk to you first because you'd potentially be a witness if this goes to trial. I leaned back in my chair. Will this affect the new easement agreement? No. This is about her personal criminal conduct, not about the civil agreement between you and the HOA. Then I'll cooperate fully. Do you need anything from me? We'll need you to provide a formal statement and to testify before the grand jury when we seek an indictment. We'll also need all your security footage and any documentation of the incident. I provided everything they needed. 2 weeks later, Patricia Drummond was indicted on charges of criminal mischief in the second degree and conspiracy to commit criminal trespass. Each charge was a misdemeanor, but together they carried potential jail time. The local newspaper covered the story. The headline read, "Former HOA President Indicted for Well Tampering Incident." It was a small article, but it made the rounds on social media. Patricia became something of a cautionary tale in HOA circles, an example of what happens when petty power goes to someone's head. The criminal case moved slowly through the system. Patricia hired an expensive lawyer from Billings who tried to get the charges dismissed. The motion was denied. They tried to argue that she'd acted in good faith based on advice from the management company. The prosecutor pointed out that good faith doesn't include lying to contractors about having permission to access private property. Eventually, Patricia took a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to criminal mischief, and the trespass charge was dropped. She was sentenced to 6 months probation, 100 hours of community service, and ordered to pay restitution for my property damage and legal fees. The judge also gave her a stern lecture about respecting property rights and the limits of HOA authority. By that point, Patricia and Howard had already moved back to California. She completed her community service at a women's shelter in Sacramento and did her probation there after getting it transferred. I heard through the grapevine that she was no longer involved with any HOAs in her new neighborhood. Life in Ridgeview Meadows settled into a peaceful routine. Ellen Foster proved to be an excellent HOA president. Under her leadership, the board revised all the rules to be clear, reasonable, and actually based on the covenants. They eliminated the obviously made-up regulations and established a fair appeals process for fines. They also instituted a rule that all major enforcement actions had to be approved by the full board, not just the president. My relationship with the community improved dramatically. The new easement agreement was working well, and the increased compensation more than covered the additional wear and tear on my well system. I even volunteered to give a presentation at an HOA meeting about water conservation and well maintenance, which was surprisingly well attended. Dennis Hart and I became good friends. We'd have beers on his back deck and laugh about the whole situation. "You know what the craziest part is?" he said one evening. "Patricia spent all that time and energy trying to collect $1,400 in bogus fines, and it ended up costing the HOA about $40,000 in legal fees, settlements, and increased easement payments. Not to mention her criminal record," I added. "Right. All because she couldn't handle someone saying no to her." The well continued to produce excellent water. I did regular maintenance and monitoring, keeping detailed logs of water quality and flow rates. Every month, I collected my $4,000 easement fee and made sure the distribution system was functioning properly. It was actually nice having the extra income, and the work wasn't difficult. One afternoon, about 4 months after everything was resolved, I was out checking the distribution manifold when Ellen Foster stopped by. She had someone with her, a young woman I didn't recognize. "Nathan, this is my niece, Tessa Sullivan. She's moving to the area and looking at houses." I was telling her about what happened with Patricia and the well, and she wanted to meet you. Tessa shook my hand. She had dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and sharp, intelligent eyes. "My aunt says you're the hero of Ridgeview Meadows." I laughed. "I don't know about that. I just stood up for my property rights. That's more than a lot of people would do. Most folks would have just paid the fines to avoid the hassle." "Yeah, well, I'm stubborn, and I don't like being pushed around." Tessa smiled. "I like that. Too many people let HOAs run roughshod over them because they think they have no choice." We talked for a while about her move to Montana. She was a civil engineer who'd gotten a job with the State Department of Transportation. She was looking at a house 3 streets over from mine. Ellen eventually excused herself, leaving Tessa and me talking about water systems and property rights. "Can I ask you something?" Tessa said. "When Patricia shut off your water, were you scared at all? Even for a minute?" "Scared? No. Annoyed, definitely, but I knew the law was on my side. I had a solid contract, clear documentation, and they'd committed obvious crimes. The only thing I was worried about was how long it would take to resolve. But they could have made your life miserable, filed endless lawsuits, harassed you constantly. They could have tried. But that's why you document everything and have a good lawyer. Most bullies back down when they realize you're not going to be intimidated and that you have the resources to fight back." Tessa nodded thoughtfully. "I'll remember that. I have a feeling HOAs are going to be an ongoing issue as more people move to Montana." "Probably. But not every HOA is bad. Ellen's doing a good job now. The key is having reasonable people in charge who understand that an HOA is supposed to serve the community, not rule over it." Tessa ended up buying the house she'd been looking at. We became friends and eventually more than friends. She had the same stubborn streak I did, the same unwillingness to back down from bullies. We understood each other. A year after the whole water incident, the Ridgeview Meadows HOA held their annual meeting. Ellen Foster asked me to attend as a guest to give an update on the well system and answer any questions. I agreed, figuring it would be good to maintain positive relationships with the community. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a modest building near the entrance to the subdivision. About 30 residents attended, which was apparently a good turnout. Ellen ran the meeting efficiently, covering financial reports, maintenance updates, and upcoming projects. Then she introduced me. As you all know, we had some difficulties last year with water access. Thanks to Nathan Ferris's patience and willingness to negotiate, we were able to establish a new easement agreement that benefits everyone. Nathan has agreed to give us an update on the well system and answer questions. I stood up and gave a brief presentation about well maintenance, water quality testing, and the overall health of the aquifer. The numbers were all good. Water production was stable, quality was excellent, and the distribution system was functioning properly. I fielded questions about everything from strange tastes in the water, usually from individual home pipes, not the well, to what would happen if the well ever ran dry, extremely unlikely given the aquifer size. One man raised his hand. What happens when your easement agreement expires? Will you renew it? That's 15 years from now, but assuming the relationship continues to be positive and the terms remain fair, I don't see why I wouldn't renew. The well produces far more water than I personally need, and it makes sense to share the resource. Another woman asked, "Do you regret how things went down last year? Would you do anything differently?" I thought about that. I regret that it got as ugly as it did. I wish Patricia had been reasonable from the start. But do I regret standing my ground? No. Sometimes you have to draw a line and defend it, especially when it comes to property rights. If I'd backed down and paid those fines, it would have just encouraged more harassment. By fighting back, I established that I wasn't going to be pushed around, and ultimately that led to a better agreement for everyone. After the meeting, several people came up to thank me personally. A few admitted they'd been part of the angry mob that came to my house and apologized again. I told them I understood. They'd been given false information by Patricia and had reacted out of frustration. Dennis pulled me aside. "You've become something of a folk hero around here, you know that? That's ridiculous." "I'm serious." People tell the story about the guy who stood up to the HOA and won. It's become this whole legend. I heard someone in town talking about it last week, and they didn't even live in the subdivision. They just thought it was a great story. Great. Now I'm the crazy guy who shut off water to a whole neighborhood. No, you're the guy who defended his property rights against an abusive HOA and came out on top. That resonates with people, especially in Montana. Property rights matter here. He was right, of course. The story had taken on a life of its own. I'd been contacted by a couple of newspapers wanting to do stories. A property rights advocacy group had asked me to speak at their conference. I'd even gotten an email from someone writing a book about HOA abuses who wanted to include my story. I declined most of the attention. I'm not comfortable being in the spotlight, and I didn't want to become some kind of anti-HOA crusader. I just wanted to live my life on my property without harassment. The years that followed were peaceful. The well continued to produce good water. The HOA under Ellen's leadership, and then her successors, remained reasonable and professional. My relationship with Tessa developed into something serious. She understood the value of the property and the well, not just as a financial asset, but as a part of my identity. This land was mine. I'd worked hard to buy it, to develop it, and to protect it. 5 years after the incident, I married Tessa in a small ceremony on my property, right next to the well house. It seemed fitting. That well had been at the center of one of the biggest conflicts of my life, and now it was witnessing one of the happiest moments. Dennis was my best man. Ellen Foster attended, along with most of the Ridgeview Meadows community. Even some of the people who'd been angry with me during the water shutoff showed up to celebrate. During the reception, Dennis gave a toast. To Nathan and Tessa, may your marriage be as solid as Nathan's property rights and as deep as his well. And may you never have to deal with another HOA president like Patricia Drummond. Everyone laughed and drank to that. Patricia herself had faded into obscurity. I'd heard she tried to join an HOA board in California, but had been rejected once they learned about her criminal record in Montana. Apparently, the property owners there had actually done their due diligence. Last I heard, she was living a quiet life somewhere in the Sacramento suburbs, far from any positions of neighborhood power. The management company that had carried out the illegal water shutoff had gone out of business. After our incident came to light, several other property owners came forward with complaints about the company's practices. The Idaho State Licensing Board had investigated and found numerous violations. The owners had closed up shop rather than face the penalties. As for me, I continued my work as a hydrogeologist, consulting on water projects across Montana and the Northern Rockies. The experience with the HOA had actually helped my career in an unexpected way. My reputation for standing firm on water rights issues made me a sought-after consultant for property disputes and resource management cases. I'd become an expert witness in several lawsuits involving water access and property rights. The Ridgeview Meadows well remained the centerpiece of my property. I'd upgraded some of the monitoring equipment and installed a state-of-the-art filtration system, not because it was necessary, but because I took pride in providing the best possible water quality. The monthly easement payments had increased with inflation adjustments built into the agreement, and the income more than covered any expenses related to the system. Sometimes I'd stand out by the well house in the evening, listening to the quiet hum of the pump, watching the sun set over the Montana hills. I'd think about how close I'd come to losing control of this property, this resource, to a petty tyrant with a title and a clipboard. I'd think about how easily things could have gone differently if I hadn't known my rights, if I hadn't had a good lawyer, if I hadn't been willing to endure some temporary hardship to defend a principle. Property rights matter. The right to control your own land, your own resources, your own property. These are fundamental rights that can't be surrendered just because someone with a bit of authority demands it. HOAs serve a purpose when they're run properly, but they can become instruments of oppression when the wrong people get power. The key is knowing where the line is and being willing to defend it. My story wasn't unique. Across the country, property owners were fighting similar battles against overreaching HOAs, against bureaucrats who forgot that their authority came with limits, against neighbors who thought that living in a community meant surrendering individual rights. Some of those battles were won, others were lost. Mine was won because I'd prepared properly, documented everything, and refused to back down when I was in the right. The well still produces excellent water. The aquifer shows no signs of depletion. The distribution system functions smoothly. The community of Ridgeview Meadows has grown and prospered, with property values steadily increasing. The nightmare of Patricia Drummond's reign has faded into history, remembered now more as a cautionary tale than a traumatic event. Ellen Foster eventually termed out as HOA president, replaced by a retired teacher named Margaret Chen, who continued the tradition of reasonable, professional management. The board operated transparently, the rules were clear and fairly enforced, and the community functioned as it should have from the beginning. I stayed involved in local water issues, serving on a county commission that dealt with resource management and conservation. My experience with the well and the subdivision made me a valuable voice in discussions about development and water access. Montana was growing. People were moving here from more populated states, and questions about water rights and resource allocation were becoming more important. Tessa and I built a good life together on that property. We added onto the house, put in a garden, adopted a couple of dogs. The land that I'd fought so hard to protect became our home in the truest sense. Every time I turned on a faucet and clean, cold water flowed out, I remembered the morning when that same faucet had sputtered and died, and I remembered what I'd done to make sure it never happened again. Years later, I was giving a talk at a property rights conference in Bozeman. After my presentation about the HOA incident, a young man approached me during the break. He looked nervous. "Mr. Ferris, I'm dealing with something similar. My HOA is threatening to fine me for having solar panels on my roof, even though there's a state law that says they can't prohibit solar installations. I don't know what to do." I spent 20 minutes talking with him, sharing the lessons I'd learned. Document everything. Know your rights. Get a good lawyer early. Don't make threats you can't back up. Be willing to endure some hardship to defend a principle. Most importantly, don't let them bully you into compliance when you're in the right. He thanked me profusely and left with a stack of my business cards to share with his lawyer. I hoped his situation would turn out as well as mine had. That evening, I drove back home to my property in rural Montana. The sun was setting as I pulled into my driveway, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. I could see the well house in the distance, its metal roof glinting in the fading light. Beyond it, the rooflines of Ridgeview Meadows were visible, 43 homes all connected to the water that flowed from my land. It was a good arrangement now, fair to everyone involved. But it had taken a crisis to get here, a confrontation that could have been avoided if one person had simply understood the limits of her authority and respected other people's rights. I walked into my house, greeted by Tessa and the dogs. The house was warm and comfortable. Water flowed freely from every tap. My property was mine, protected by law and by my willingness to defend it. Patricia Drummond was a distant memory, a cautionary tale told at HOA meetings and property rights conferences. The well continued its quiet work, drawing water from deep in the earth, sending it through pipes to my home and to the homes of my neighbors. It was a resource, yes, but it was also a symbol of something more important: independence, self-reliance. The fundamental right to control what was yours, and to refuse to surrender that control to those who had no legitimate claim to it. Some people thought I'd been too harsh, too uncompromising in my response to the HOA's actions. They thought I should have just paid the fines and moved on. But those people didn't understand. It was never about the money. It was about the principle. It was about drawing a line and saying this far and no further. It was about refusing to be bullied, even when compliance would have been easier. I'd made the right choice. The proof was in the life I'd built, the community that had grown around the resource I controlled, the relationships that had been forged through conflict and then strengthened through cooperation. Sometimes you have to fight for what's right, even when it's difficult. Especially when it's difficult. The Montana evening settled in around my property, quiet and peaceful. Somewhere in California, Patricia Drummond was living her life, hopefully having learned something from the experience. Somewhere in the Ridgeview Meadows subdivision, 43 families were using water from my well, probably without thinking about where it came from or what it had taken to secure their access to it. And I was home, on my land, master of my own property, answerable to no one except the law and my own conscience. The well hummed quietly in the distance, doing what it had always done, providing life-giving water from the depths of the earth. It would continue that work long after I was gone, a testament to the value of standing firm when others tried to take what wasn't theirs to take. That was my story. The story of how an HOA shut off my water for unpaid fines, not realizing that their water depended on the well I owned and controlled. The story of how I fought back and won, the story of property rights, personal dignity, and the importance of knowing where to draw the line. It wasn't a complicated story, but it was mine, and I'd lived every difficult moment of it, and I'd do it all again if I had to.